Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Scarlet and Great here on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us. Got a huge matchup with Michigan State, Ohio State, and Michigan State this weekend. The Buckeyes take on the Spartans, which looks to be a huge top 10 matchup. An awesome day in Columbus. I hope if you were there at the game, you'll come hang out this Saturday with myself, Braxton Miller, and Zach Smith. There'll be a huge environment. Game day will be there. Late kick, Josh Pate will be there. Columbus is the place to be. If you are there, come hang out with Zach, myself, and Braxton next to the Varsity Club at Charging on Lane. We'd love to see you there and really hang out before the game. It's a great time, great food, great atmosphere. And as always, help us grow this channel, guys. Before I bring in the distinguished guest I'm about to bring in here from BuckeyeScoop, an alternate here on Coach in the Bullet. We'll do a different show. Spoiler alert, I'll just call it Noon in the Bullet. Just want to get a quick moment of housekeeping before we bring in the guest and talk about this huge matchup and how this team is doing so far. Help us grow the channel and get 4,000 subscribers by the season's end. Thank you to Chat Sports and all our subscribers. Please help us get there 4K by season's end. We're over 3,500. I'd love to get that extra boost there. You guys have shown when you really feel like it, you want to turn on the subscriptions, you can really amp it up. So I appreciate that. So without further ado, I am going to bring in my distinguished guest host, Kevin Noon from BuckeyeScoop. Kevin, it's good to see you, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, a pleasure is mine. You class up the show a bit. Somebody that's been on the Buckeye beat for a long time. And you're over there at BuckeyeScoop doing some cool things with Tony Girdman and Tom Orr, and you guys look like you have a lot of fun together. Am I wrong in saying you guys have a really good vibe, that you guys just mesh really well?
Yeah, Tony and Tom, we get along very well. Sometimes I'll throw a little humor in. Sometimes I have to separate those two when they get at it. But, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, hopefully you don't catch a stray punch in the crossfire in the process. But, you know how Tom can be, such an angry guy. Just kidding. Everybody that's ever met Tom seems to be like nicest guy you ever want to meet. And just everybody loves you, Kevin. So I'm glad you're coming on the show, standing in for Zach, who his equipment is down. Since I got people to tweet at him last time, go ahead and tweet at Coach Zach Smith. What's wrong with your video equipment, and see if that lights a fire under him. Kevin, I want to know, since I want to know this, first of all, have you ever seen a Buckeye offense this good? And before you answer that, I also want you to tell the audience just how long you've been covering Buckeye football.
Well, I've been back on the beat since 2006, and then I also was on the beat right out of college from 95 through 99. So we're north of 20 years, and I've been in the industry pretty much since getting out of Ohio State. So it's been a minute. So I certainly have some depth in terms of looking back historically just on teams that I've covered. And then, of course, anybody who does this for a job is a student of history. So I kind of look through there. So I wouldn't say that, I enrolled at Ohio State in 1989. So my history goes deeper than that.
Wow. So, okay, so you are, I was born in 1988 myself. So you have more Buckeye acumen and depth of knowledge than I could ever think of. And even grading on the curve of today's offensive age, right? Like, obviously, you're not going to compare the 86 Buckeyes to this Buckeyes yard for yard, stat for stat, but you can say, okay, but maybe they were super talented, and for their age, the age they played in were really, really good. Is this still the best that you've ever seen?
Well, you're right. It is a very different game. It's a much more wide open game. I think that the rules are slanted toward offenses being successful over defenses, with where you are with how pass interference is called and protecting the quarterback. But, this team is just, the offense is scary good when you have 1,000-yard rusher in TreVeyon Henderson, you have 1,000-yard receiver in Jaxson Smith-Njigba, and then you have Garrett Wilson, who's inside of 200 yards from getting to 1,000, and then you have Chris Olave, who's just outside of 200 yards from getting to 1,000. There have only been 5 or 6 instances where a team has had, 3,000-yard receivers, and that's none of them have done it with a 1,000-yard rusher. And we're only through 10 games. And another thing historically to remember is that we went from 11 games to 12 games. At some point, it all runs together.
Right.
We had a point of where bowl stats didn't used to count. They count now. So, I mean, you can play up to 15 games. So sometimes your stats do get watered down. But we're still talking at 10 games right now, and we're looking at TreVeyon Henderson at 1,000+ yards rushing. We're looking at JSN at 1,000 yards receiving right now. So it's very easy to sit there and say, look, we're at a constant amount of games. Nobody has had the opportunity to play more games now than what we're looking at in the past. So longer story long, yes.
Yes, yeah, and more so than just the three guys, the four guys you named having gaudy stats. You can always go back and say, okay, what about team stats? And was there another team this good? Maybe they weren't this top heavy, but they were spread out well. And I think about when, I can't name you all the receivers, but in 2006, when Jim Tressel surprised us all in the Michigan game and went 5 wide for a little bit, right? And you had a good plethora of talent there, right? And deep, but not these jaw-dropping guys. So this is just really fun to watch, and to think that you can have an offense this good with a freshman quarterback, with a guy taking a snap the first year. That's really, really shocking. Ryan Day obviously knows what he's doing and going and getting these kids. So, the sky's the limit, I guess. And the other thing about this team, though, is they are youthful, right, Kevin? And this is what I wonder about this team when I watch it, that sometimes they make you scratch your head, and sometimes they make your jaw hit the floor. So does this team, are you worried about maybe a trip up down the stretch when they only have 2 games left in the conference championship game, presumably, but all good teams from here on out? Is this team still in danger of maybe shooting itself in the foot a little bit because of the youth?
Did this team shoot itself in the foot against Penn State? Did this team shoot itself in the foot against Nebraska? Could that have been the trip up? Could a 9-point win over Nebraska have been the trip up? And we're beyond that? I mean,
and Oregon.
Yes, it's hard to win all your games by 17, 21, 24, 28 points. I mean, I get it. I've covered the sport a long time. We don't see many teams who come out and are able to pull off that feat. So I hear a lot of people saying that there's going to be a game still coming of where this team is going to have to really gut one out. But, the devil's advocate in me is like, maybe they've already done that. I mean, they were already annihilating teams, and then they had that 2-game stretch of where they got really bogged down in the red zone where, they couldn't run the ball. I mean, whether it was somewhat by choices that they were making or it was just, the other teams were playing so well. I mean, not exactly sure what the genesis of that is, but, we very well could see a situation of where that's beyond them, because there's no team left on the schedule at any point where Ohio State could sit there and say, meh, I'm not that interested there. Michigan State is a top 10 team. Michigan is a top 10 team. Then you get to the Big Ten championship game, and while, it's looking like it could be Wisconsin's not going to be in the top 10. It's for a Big Ten title. And then if you win all 3 of those, you're in the college football playoff. And then you have all of those prizes in front of you. So you're not going to run into a situation of where you're going to see a disinterested team. I think any type of challenges you see is because the level of competition goes up, though I'm not completely sold that Michigan State or Michigan are going to pose tremendous problems to this team, regardless of what the lofty rankings say.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, and a couple there. One, Wisconsin, quietly. Wisconsin is now not Georgia. Wisconsin is now the #1 defense as for yardage per game in the country, and they have been for a couple weeks. No one's talked about that. And you got to think with that. Now, I haven't watched them recently, but their offense I'm sure has improved, but how good can it be? And it's, Wisconsin's not known for offense. An offense that is constantly punting and putting their defense, tired and on the field, and that defense is still allowing less yards per game than a team like Georgia. That's a tough challenge, and certainly a marquee matchup of strength versus strength if you talk about this Buckeye team. And the other point you bring up is, maybe we've already had our C+ effort. that teams, you can't be perfect. I hate when people say, well, Alabama lost to A&M. Like, well, we can't you can't say that team on its worst night is who they are always. And not to mention, we've lost a game. Buckeyes have lost a game to Oregon. So you've had several C-plus games perhaps, and maybe that's out of their system because C-plus from here on out gets you beat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm just sitting here, was pulling up some Wisconsin offensive stats just in case we were going to go there. But
I want to know this.
C-plus is going to get you beat. Yeah, Wisconsin, 9 passing touchdowns against 11 interceptions. They've rushed for 2,271 yards this season, 22 touchdowns. They certainly have not had a lot of success in terms of keeping guys healthy. Braylon Allen seems to be their main runner with 834 yards. They lose Ches Malusi, who had 815 yards, but it's not a team that's going to be able to do it via the pass when their leading receiver, Danny Davis, a State of Ohio product, 27 catches for 418. No receiver on that team has more than 2 touchdowns, and we're really putting the cart before the horse. Ohio State hasn't qualified for anything. Wisconsin hasn't qualified for anything, but if we couldn't look ahead, we'd have nothing to talk about on these shows. So we are always looking ahead. So I'm always just noodling around on the internet, seeing what it is I can find. And, once again, yes, Wisconsin, fantastic defensive numbers, but that offense, it ain't fixed. I mean, you getting fat against Northwestern proves nothing to me.
Well, what I would like to do, and we can't do this now, but for those of you who like to crunch numbers at home, I would be interested in looking at, say, a decent offense, their last 5, and Wisconsin offense, their last 5, and see if that even looks, somewhat similar, because I know it was so skewed poorly at the beginning of the season. But Kevin, getting to the task at hand, Sparty here has played spoiler before to the Buckeyes. I can think of 2 major times recently, 2013, 2015. Late 90s, before my time when I was really interested in the Buckeyes, there was just a huge gut punch, right, that Sparty delivered that some, Buckeye fans still talk about to this day. This team is good enough to play spoiler again with that C+, B-, maybe even B effort if they play an A+ game. So what is it about Sparty that is the most, I guess, concerning, although the Buckeyes are going to be heavy favorites, but what's the most concerning about them?
Ohio State hasn't faced a running back like Kenneth Walker since really the opening game against Minnesota when Mo Ibrahim ran for $160 something and then got hurt and, was well on his way to 200 yards. Sure. We saw Oregon have some success with their 2-headed monster of CJ Vedral, who's hurt now, and Travis Dye, but Ohio State really hasn't faced that type of running game. But what is Walker's status right now? A little bit of a gimpy ankle. You sit there and you look at what Michigan State's done in its last 4 games. 100 yards 4 games ago against Indiana, and then of course in the Michigan game, the team runs for $199 and 5 touchdowns, and then against Purdue 182 and 2 scores, against Maryland 194 and 2 scores. I think that the combination of what Walker's able to do and the fact that they do have a competent passing game, but even with that, if they don't have Jalen Nailor, we certainly saw what happened to Ohio State when Garrett Wilson was off the field, and Ohio State's a little bit of a different animal in having 3 talented receivers in terms of its top 3. I mean, Ohio State really is deeper than 3 receivers, if we're being honest with ourselves, but the law firm of Olave, Wilson, and Smith-Njigba are the best receivers in the nation in my book. And then when you take one of those guys off, it changes a little bit of what it is that you're able to do. If you take Jalen Nailor off, I mean, you still have Jaden Reed, and he can do some things, but you don't have Nailor. Who are you relying on? Mosley or Hayward? Who's your second guy? Do you sit there and put a guy like Denzel Burke out there and say, this is your responsibility, largely kind of the way that Denzel Burke largely had the responsibility of locking up against David Bell for Purdue? It makes Michigan State a different team. But for all of these things that are there, and I'm probably getting ahead to your next question, Michigan State cannot defend the pass, period.
I've heard as much. Is it as bad as people say?
At all. And the last 3 games, Michigan threw for 406. Michigan can't throw the ball, and Michigan goes for 406. Purdue goes for 536. For the better teams giving up 390 against Purdue. So, I mean, we kind of understand that. And then Maryland goes for 350. So, and I've said this time and time again, whether or not it was at BuckeyeScoop where I'm at now or where I was at prior, game's not about passing yards, and the game's not about total yardage. It's about total points. You win with points. If you sit there and you can march up and down the field, and if you don't score, it doesn't mean anything. But Michigan State cannot defend the pass, and Ohio State can pass very, very, very well. So the only way that Michigan State's going to win this is going to be in some sort of just insane, point fest.
Yeah, that weakness on strength right there is probably just it's just so hard to overcome for Sparty. Like the one thing we do, I mean, we do everything well offensively, really well is passing, and you just can't, man, that's almost insurmountable. But what a Michigan State victory would look like to me in my mind would be getting a few good, Ohio State susceptible on defense. They are. So throwing the ball, however you want to do it, attacking the seams and, being good and being proficient throwing. Obviously they have a nice rusher, and, maybe Kenneth Walker looked at this 4-2-5 defense and says, that's too light for me. Marcus Williamson, you are not a linebacker. I will run through you, and he gets going. But offensively, what I believe it would look like is the Buckeyes move the ball between the 20s. They have more red zone woes, and CJ Stroud, not bashing on a kid, but has some freshman moments, some little head scratching freshman moments. If you lay all that out, all that would have to happen for Sparty to play spoiler in my mind. What do you think?
Yeah, Michigan State would have to win like a 28-23 type of game where Ohio State scores 2 touchdowns and 3 field goals and turns the ball over 4 times and has some bad luck along the way.
0 for 3 on 4th down.
Michigan State has a couple of return touchdowns. I mean, it's going to have to be Ohio State would have to help out Michigan State, in my opinion, with some sloppy ball handling, things of that nature. And we would have to see a pretty decent multiple of 3 in Ohio State's score, signifying them just bogging down, it getting into a situation of where Michigan State's able to try and at least stop the run. But again, the likelihood of that happening seems relatively low to me. We look at the line at 18.5 opening up on Sunday, Monday of game week.
Yeah.
People are already like, oh, how do they cover that? How do they cover that? Well, they covered it against Purdue. I mean, I'm going to admit, I thought it was too many points against Purdue, and they end up covering handily. So, I don't know how to feel about it, but I think that Ohio State's going to be able to throw however, whenever it wants to. That passing game is going to open up the running game. Michigan State's a banged up team. We haven't really seen a 2-deep at this point. Granted, we never see a 2-deep for Ohio State, so I'm not holding my breath, but Michigan State has put out some 2-deeps along the way. I want to see kind of what's going on there. I haven't started writing any of my previews yet because I want to see who they've got, who they don't got, but I don't see a likely scenario where Michigan State's going to get the better of the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I would say this is not the talent gap between Michigan State this year and Ohio State is bigger than 2013 and 2015, in my opinion. I guess from your head nod that you likely agree.
Yeah, this is a really talented team. And don't get me wrong, 2015, they were just coming off of the national championship. That was the 17-14 game. Michael Geiger kicks the 41-yarder at the end of regulation to win it. I mean, where's Zeke? Zeke Elliott didn't play enough in that one. Obviously, 13 was in the Big Ten championship game. The Braxton Miller 4th and 2, Jeff Hireman wasn't quite able to get that block in place, and that ended up, Ohio State ended up losing that game by 10. I mean, Ohio State was marching with a chance to take the lead, And then the only other game in the 2000s that Ohio State lost was 2011, and that we know that was during that weird transitional year, and that was only 10-7. Granted, Ohio State only scored its touchdown in the last 10 seconds of the game. Joe Boserman to Evan Spencer on a 33-yarder onside kick was not answered, and that was that.
Yeah, so it looks to be hopefully the Buckeyes' day, but at least some challenge in some form or fashion, and a good test for the Buckeyes to, let them know they have to bring their A game here on out, or these, the C+ efforts, like we said, will get you beat. Make sure you guys go check out Kevin and the cool stuff they're doing over at BuckeyeScoop. They're pumping out a lot of YouTube videos and such. And if you don't know who they are at this point, I don't know what to tell you, but thanks so much for coming on, Kevin.
Absolutely.
All right. See you guys. Always goodbye. God bless. Go Bucks.